These tactics were road tested. January 6th was a culmination of the president's actions, not an aberration from them. The insurrection was the most violent and dangerous episode so far in Donald Trump's continuing pattern and practice of inciting violence.
So if you see somebody getting ready to throw a tomato, knock the crap out of them, would you? Seriously. Okay? Just knock the hell. I promise you, I will pay for the legal fees, I promise.
Is there any political leader in this room who believes that if he is ever allowed by the Senate to get back into the Oval Office, Donald Trump would stop inciting violence to get his way? Would you bet the lives of more police officers on that? Would you bet the safety of your family on that? Would you bet the future of your democracy on that?
That was lead impeachment manager Jamie Raskin during Democrats' second and final day of arguments in the Senate impeachment trial against former President Donald Trump. As we mentioned today, House managers showed more video of comments Mr. Trump made ahead of January 6th, as well as footage of his supporters citing his words later during the attack. Former President Trump's defense attorneys are expected to finish presenting their closing arguments Friday. For more, let's bring in CBSN legal analyst Rebecca Roiphe. She is a professor of law at New York Law School. Hi there, Rebecca. So we heard President Trump exhort his followers to, quote, fight like hell on January 6th. Why are House impeachment managers working to show a longer pattern of behavior?
Well, one of the most important elements that the House managers have to prove is that President Trump willfully incited this violence. So one way of doing that is to show that this happened in the past and the same pattern occurred. So he said things and his followers engaged in violence, particularly with regard to the big lie. So to the extent to which he said in the past that the election was stolen and that led to violence, that should have put him on notice, made it foreseeable that when he said things like fight like hell, that people were going to take that seriously. People were going to actually do it. So it's a way of showing a pattern and practice of behavior that actually goes to this very difficult element of intent. There's also another thing. And if you heard House Manager Raskin at the end, part of what he was also saying is how grave and how important this is. So he managed to use one thing for two purposes. One is to show intent, and the other is to show if we don't hold him accountable, look what we're endorsing. And I think those are twin uses of this pattern and practice of his words leading to violence.
Well, House managers have the burden of proof here, trying to show that the Capitol riot wouldn't have happened without encouragement from former President Trump. In your view, Rebecca, how did they do?
I thought they did a really good job in essentially tying together these pieces. Now, if you're looking at this evidence and, you see it differently, I suppose one might. But when you put together all of these things, particularly what we were just talking about, which is the pattern and practice, the foreseeability of it, and then secondly, the call and response. So during the riot, the rioters were actually listening to him and reading out his tweets on a bullhorn. So in that way, they've shown not only was this foreseeable, but actually the people were responding to the president. They saw themselves as responding to the president. So those two pieces together really made a strong case in my mind. If you add the final piece, I think the most important final piece, which is that he did nothing to stop this. If he hadn't intended it, why would he have waited 2 hours to do anything? And then even then had this weak, tepid response in which he actually, in many ways, took the sides of the insurrectionists, calling them patriots and saying he loved them. So those three pieces put together, I thought, did a very good job of leading to the only one conclusion that you can take from this evidence, which is this was, in fact, foreseeable. He knew it. He knew it was going to happen and he wanted it to happen. So, how they take it, I don't know. But they do take, the senators take an oath to do impartial justice. And it seems to me that the case was very strong today.
Yeah, what did House impeachment managers try to argue, Rebecca, with regard to the president's state of mind? Because this question of intent, as you note, is a difficult one, even in a court of law, much less in this kind of partisan political proceeding, which this is.
Right. I mean, what they had to do was take the camera back. So take a broader shot at what's going on here. Because if it was just this one rally, if it was this one incident, maybe you can take, the fact that he said peaceful protests out of context and say, he didn't mean for violence to happen. He only meant this to be peaceful. When he said fight, he meant it metaphorically. And, I don't think in an isolated way, that's a bad argument. But what they did effectively was that they essentially took the camera back and showed that this had been going on for quite a long time. And so that, sorry about the dog, so that
that's all right.
essentially makes it such that it's hard to see it as that one incident, and it looks more like he actually must have known this was willful. It was part of a long practice that stretched back even before the election, when he was suggesting that this election will only go to Biden if it was rigged. And so it seems like these pieces are tied together and quite deliberate, as opposed to, just by accident this happened. It doesn't look like that when you put it all together. And the video evidence and the tweets and his words tied together made a pretty good case.
So let's talk about the defense. President Trump is reportedly irate with his defense attorneys, and his lawyers must now present their argument against that mountain of evidence that House managers have just laid out. Rebecca, how are they going to try to pick apart the case that House managers laid out?
Yeah, so I think they have really two options. One is to, as I said, try to make it into one isolated event, try to pull out pieces that look like, they could be innocent, where he says, peacefully protest during that speech. If they can isolate and focus people on those isolated incidents, perhaps they can make a case that this was not willful incitement. Second of all, I think they're going to point to, fiery speech. Politicians engage in fiery speech all the time. They're always trying to, rile people up. And to the extent that they can suggest that what President Trump was doing was simply the same thing, he never thought this would end up in a riot or in violence or in anybody breaching the walls of the Capitol, that's their only factual argument. I think Raskin, and his very final words, foresaw this. And he said, look, when they're listening to what they say, ask yourself why he didn't do something immediately afterwards. If that was his intention, why didn't he stop it? He had the power to stop it, and he didn't. And I think that's a very powerful argument. And it was smart of him to leave us with those words, because as we're listening to the defense, it might be convincing, but for, a few of those things. First of all, the pattern and practice, and second of all, what he did afterwards really is indicative of what he meant to do when he was giving that speech. So I think that's the way they're going to go. The other way they're going to go is to try to distract with legal arguments. And Raskin also foresaw that when he said, look, the legal question about whether the Senate has the jurisdiction to try this case, because President Trump is now a private citizen, has been decided. You cannot decide on that legal issue anymore. You have to focus on the facts, senators. I think the senators very much want to focus on the legal issue, and I think the defense attorneys will try to do that too, even though technically I think Raskin's right. That's already been decided, so they shouldn't be deciding on that. They should be deciding on the actual facts.
All right, well, I'll be watching closely. Rebecca Roiphe for us. Rebecca, always great to see you. Thank you very much.
Nice seeing you too.